I knew it was going to be one of those days the second I stepped into my garage and saw tire marks on the concrete. Not car tires, golf cart tires. I'm not kidding. Right there on my property, bold as brass. And I already had a good guess who it was. Margerie Walton. President of the Rose Hill Bluffs HOA, tyrant of the cul-de-sac, and self-declared guardian of community standards. She was the type who measured grass height with a ruler and reported your trash can placement like it was a federal offense. She drove this ridiculous champagne-colored golf cart with a decal that read HOA business only, like she was patrolling a military base instead of a suburban block in Oregon. And now she'd been in my garage. I crouched down to check the scuff marks near the base of my tool bench. Something had scraped it hard. That's when I heard the faint hum of a small electric motor. I turned and saw the garage door slowly rising. And right there, like something out of a bad sitcom, was Margerie Walton in her golf cart, halfway inside my garage again. She didn't even look surprised. "Michael, I need to speak with you about your backyard fence. It's half an inch too tall and violates HOA guidelines 14B through 14G, she said, tapping on a clipboard like she was writing me up for a felony. "You're literally in my garage," I said, standing completely still as the absurdity of it all sunk in. "Did you just drive in here? It's HOA business. The bylaws give me authority to inspect properties at any time," she said like she was quoting scripture. I tried knocking earlier, no answer. So I let myself in. "You drove into my garage, Margerie. I needed to document the fence from the side angle. I didn't want to walk around. My hips acting up," she added, like that somehow made it okay. I stared at her, then at the clipboard, which had an actual photo of my backyard taped to it. She'd been scoping my place out for days, hadn't she? "You need to back out of my garage right now," I said, stepping forward. "I'm not finished with my inspection," she said, folding her arms like this was her living room and I was the guest. So I walked over to the side wall, grabbed the emergency pull cord and yanked it down. The garage door slammed shut behind her. "What are you doing?" she barked. "You can't trap an HOA official. You're trespassing," I replied, already pulling my phone from my pocket. "You've got about 5 minutes before the cops get here. Use the time wisely." "You'll regret this, Michael Dean," she shouted through the growing panic in her voice. "Not as much as you're gonna regret driving into someone's garage like you own the place," I said, walking back into the house. And then I dialed 911. The officer's cruiser pulled up a few minutes after I ended the call. I'd already unlocked the side door and was standing in the driveway when he stepped out. He looked to be in his late 30s, tall, with a buzz cut, and the sort of expression that said he'd seen one too many neighborhood disputes. I didn't blame him. He probably thought this was another barking dog or fence paint complaint. Then he looked past me and spotted the golf cart still sitting inside the garage, engine humming softly and his brows raised. "Is that hers?" he asked, nodding toward the garage. "Yep, she drove it in." Claimed she had the right to inspect my property unannounced. He let out a slow breath like he was already calculating the paperwork. "You said she entered without permission, didn't knock, didn't call. Just rolled in like she's got keys to the city." He adjusted his duty belt and walked toward the side entrance. I followed, arms crossed, watching through the open doorway as he stepped into the garage. Margerie was still seated, arms folded tightly across her chest, lips pursed like she was trying to vacuum her soul back into her mouth. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Reyes with the County Sheriff's Department," he said calmly. "Can you explain what you're doing inside this man's garage?" "I am conducting a compliance check," she said, lifting that ridiculous clipboard like it was a badge. "As acting president of the Rose Hill Bluffs HOA, I am authorized to—" "I'm going to stop you right there," he said. "You're on private property without permission. That's trespassing." "I am not trespassing. The bylaws, HOA bylaws, don't override state law," he cut in. "Unless you have court-ordered access or a warrant, you have no legal authority to enter someone's garage." She shifted in her seat, hands gripping the steering wheel like she might make a break for it. I was merely trying to document a structural violation. The fence in the backyard is, your reason for being here isn't the issue. The fact that you entered this space without consent is. She opened her mouth again, but he raised a hand. You need to step out of the vehicle. I have a bad hip, she said flatly. You got in just fine. Reluctantly, she swung her legs out and stood with the stiffness of someone who wasn't used to being challenged. Officer Reyes looked over the scene, then turned to me. You want to press charges? I hesitated. The idea of watching her dragged off in cuffs was tempting, but I was playing a longer game. For now, I just want this documented, but I want her trespassed. She's not to step foot on my property again, front, back, or garage. He nodded and turned back toward Margerie. You're being formally trespassed from this residence. If you return without invite, you'll be arrested. Do you understand? You're making a mistake, she muttered, chin high. He's in violation of HOA standards. He's trying to intimidate me to avoid compliance. I'm not the HOA's enforcement arm, he replied. You want to file a civil complaint, do it through the proper channels, but if you step foot on this property again, you won't be leaving in a golf cart. She didn't respond. Just stood there as he wrote something in his notepad, then asked for her ID. After taking her statement and mine, he told her she was free to go but reiterated the trespass warning. I watched her back out slowly, looking more like a defeated parade marshal than a neighborhood authority. Once she was gone, I turned to the officer. How often do you deal with this kind of thing? He chuckled. Too often. HOAs get power-hungry, especially when they think nobody's watching, but this, driving into someone's garage. That's a new one. Should I expect retaliation? He lowered his voice. If she tries anything else, start a paper trail, keep everything documented, and if she comes back, call us again, that'll be strike 2. He handed me a card with the case number and left. Inside, I sat down at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. If Margerie wanted a war, she was going to get one, just not the kind she was used to winning. I started digging. The Rose Hill Bluffs HOA had been incorporated as a nonprofit 10 years earlier. The bylaws were online, but poorly scanned and barely legible. I ran them through a text extractor and started reading. Buried in the back pages was something interesting. Any board member caught violating state trespass laws could be removed by a 2/3 community vote. I made a note. Next, I searched the county's public records and found something even juicier. In the last 3 years, the HOA had levied over $90,000 in fines across 30 households. Most of them were for minor infractions: paint shades, mailbox height, even one for unauthorized seasonal decor. And of those fines, over half were paid directly to a private law firm, McBride and Bixby, whose managing partner just happened to be Margerie's nephew. That wasn't just abuse of power. That was a racket. I spent the next 2 hours building a spreadsheet: dates, addresses, fine amounts, categories, payment paths. I cross-referenced them with the firm's public billing history and found a pattern. Nearly every resident who contested a fine ended up paying legal fees, even when the complaint was dropped. It didn't take a lawyer to see what was going on. They were threatening residents with legal action, dragging them through paperwork nightmares, and collecting fees no matter the outcome. People paid to make it stop, not because they were guilty. That night, I printed everything. Not just the files, but photos of the garage intrusion, copies of the police report, and a list of the top 5 residents most frequently fined. I wasn't just going to defend myself, I was going to take the whole system apart. The next morning, I paid a visit to the city council liaison. Her name was Naomi Hargrave, a sharp-eyed woman with a background in municipal law. I laid the folder on her desk, opened it, and let her read in silence. "These are serious allegations," she said finally. "There's a pattern of financial exploitation. And the president of the HOA just trespassed into my garage to try and enforce a rule that doesn't even exist." She flipped through the documents. "You've done your homework. I'm not just angry, I'm prepared." Her eyes narrowed. "You want to file a formal complaint?" "Yes." and I want to start the process of removing her." She tapped a pencil against her desk. "I can initiate a review with the Municipal Oversight Committee. But you'll need support from the residents." "I'll get it." As I walked out of City Hall, I felt something I hadn't since moving into the neighborhood: momentum. Margerie Walton had run this place like her personal fiefdom for years. But now she'd crossed the wrong driveway. Naomi Hargrave emailed me the next afternoon. The city's Municipal Oversight Committee had reviewed the materials. I gave her especially the financial transfers to Marjorie's nephew's law firm and scheduled a preliminary inquiry. She didn't say it outright, but the tone of her message made it clear. This wasn't going away quietly. That evening, I took a walk around the neighborhood. Not to breathe or clear my head, I had a plan. I started knocking on a few doors, beginning with a retired couple 2 blocks down. They'd lived in Rosehill Bluffs longer than anyone else on the street and were always polite in that vague, polite way seniors are when they don't want to get involved. Until I showed them what I had. "Margerie fined you for hanging a wind chime?" I asked, holding up a photocopy of the citation I'd pulled from the HOA's internal ledger leaked by a sympathetic board member who'd had enough. "That was 4 years ago," said the husband, a wiry man with a beard that looked carved from steel wool. "She said the sound violated the quiet hours clause, but that was never in the handbook. She threatened to bring in legal counsel if we didn't pay," his wife added. "We couldn't afford a lawyer. We just paid the fine and took it down." "Her nephew's firm billed you for it," I said, handing them a second page with the law firm's invoice dated the same week the wind chime came down. They stared at the papers for a long time. "You're not the only ones," I said. "But if we want to do something about it, I need your signatures. We're pushing for a vote of no confidence. If we can get enough residents to sign, the city will step in." They didn't hesitate. The pen hit the paper like it had been waiting years. By the end of the week, I had 27 signatures. Some people were skeptical at first, but when they saw the breakdown of where their fines had gone, skepticism turned to anger. A few even brought out their own paperwork, old notices, letters signed by Margerie, and copies of threats they'd never dared challenge. One woman, a single mother of 2 who worked the night shift at the hospital, gave me a stack of certified mail receipts. She'd been fined for having non-regulation curtains visible from the street. The fabric, sheer white panels from a clearance bin at a home goods store. She'd paid over $600 just to avoid a lien. I added her case to the growing file. The following Monday, I received a letter in the mail hand-delivered, because of course it was. It was from the HOA's Compliance Committee, which Margerie had clearly invented on the spot. They were launching an internal investigation into my conduct for threatening the integrity of community governance and inciting neighborly unrest. It was printed on pink paper. I pinned it to the fridge like a kindergarten drawing and kept going. On Thursday, just as I was finishing a call with a local investigative journalist, my doorbell rang. Standing on the porch was a man in a crisp gray suit with a leather briefcase and an expression like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Michael Dean?" he asked. "That's me." "You've been served," he said, handing me a thick envelope, then turning and walking off without another word. Inside was a cease and desist letter on McBride and Bixby letterhead accusing me of defamation, unlawful distribution of financial records, and malicious disruption of HOA proceedings. There was no actual summons attached, just threats. I scanned and emailed it to Naomi and the journalist. Then I got back to work. 2 days later, the city posted a notice on the community bulletin board near the townhomes. A formal hearing had been scheduled in front of the Municipal Oversight Committee. Residents were encouraged to attend and submit written statements. Margerie must have seen it. That night, her golf cart started circling the block again, moving slower than usual. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just stared. She didn't stop by my garage again, though. The hearing was held in the city's community center, a low brick building with bad acoustics and folding chairs that creaked every time someone shifted. I arrived early and watched the room fill up first with a few curious neighbors, then with angry ones. Margerie walked in last, flanked by two men in expensive suits and a woman I recognized from the law firm's website. She carried her clipboard like a shield. The committee sat at a long table, 5 members in all, including Naomi. They opened the proceedings with a formal statement, then turned the floor over to public comment. I went first. "I'm not here to complain about power trips or petty fines," I said. "I'm here because I caught the president of our HOA inside my garage without permission, without cause, and without remorse." There were murmurs. Margerie's lawyers scribbled notes. She claimed she was inspecting my fence. The police report is included in the file I submitted. But that's not the real issue. The real issue is what I found afterward. The money trail, the pattern of threats, the misuse of authority to funnel fines into a private law firm tied to her family. I passed copies of the spreadsheet to the clerk, who distributed them to the committee. The residents here aren't just being over-regulated, they're being extorted. And when they push back, they're threatened with legal action. That's not governance, that's abuse. I sat down. One by one, others stood up. The retired couple, the hospital worker. A young teacher who'd been fined for using a non-approved mailbox because it was black instead of bronze. It wasn't just testimony. It was an indictment. When it was Margerie's turn, she didn't stand. One of her lawyers did. "These allegations are based on incomplete information and misinterpretation of administrative procedures," he said with the voice of someone who'd never lost a parking ticket. "Our client has always acted in accordance with the HOA's charter and municipal code." Naomi leaned forward. "Is it true that McBride and Bixby received over 50% of all collected fines over the past 3 years?" "That figure lacks context," the lawyer replied. "Then provide it." He hesitated. "The firm handles all enforcement-related legal matters for the HOA." And Margerie Walton's relation to the managing partner, the room was silent. "She's his aunt," the lawyer admitted. "Conflict of interest?" Naomi asked. "We disclosed the relationship to the board." "Where?" He shuffled papers. "In the internal minutes of the executive session dated, those minutes were never made public," Naomi said. The committee recessed for deliberation. It took them 12 minutes. When they returned, the chairperson read the findings aloud. "Upon review of the evidence, the committee concludes that the HOA board under the leadership of Margerie Walton violated multiple ethical standards, including financial misconduct, failure to disclose conflicts of interest, and unauthorized entry onto private property." Gasps, then applause. "We are moving to formally dissolve the current board pending a full audit. Interim leadership will be appointed, and all pending fines are suspended until further notice." Margerie stood up. "You don't have the authority." "Yes, we do," Naomi said. "And if you'd like to contest it, the city's legal department will be happy to meet with you." Margerie didn't say another word. She walked out, her golf cart keys clenched in her fist. The next week, the audit team found even more. Falsified mail logs, duplicate fine notices. Private security invoices billed to residents without approval. The district attorney launched an investigation into the firm's role in the kickbacks. McBride and Bixby shuttered their HOA division within days. But the moment that stuck with me came a few weeks later when I walked past the bulletin board and saw a new flyer: Community Town Hall Rebuilding Rosehill Bluffs Together. It was signed by the interim board. And below it, someone had taped a photo of Margerie's golf cart, parked crooked in front of my garage with a caption scribbled in marker: "Not everything on 4 wheels belongs in someone else's house." The air outside the community center was crisp, tinged with pine and distant chimney smoke. People didn't rush off after the hearing. They lingered in quiet clusters. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years now suddenly bound by shared outrage. I stayed back, watching them shake hands, exchange numbers. nod to one another like survivors after a storm. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I drove to the county records office, an unassuming tan building with flickering overhead lights and a clerk behind bulletproof glass who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. I handed over the request form I'd filled out the night before. "Looking to review HOA property filings," I said. She gave me a slow blink, then shuffled back into the filing room. 10 minutes later, she returned with a stack of folders stamped with worn labels. I carried them to a side table and opened the top one. I wasn't looking for more fines. I was looking for something deeper, something that might explain why Margerie dug in so hard, even when it made no strategic sense. I found it in the third folder. 6 years ago, the HOA had acquired a narrow strip of land that ran behind 7 homes at the end of the block. It was filed as a community greenway, but on the map, it was barely more than a drainage easement. The HOA had categorized it as a shared recreational space, but it had no benches, no lighting, no path. Just weeds and runoff. I flagged the page and kept digging. 2 months after the purchase, a permit was filed. Proposed development tool shed storage facility. The name on the application wasn't Margerie's. It was a man named Curtis Leland, listed as facilities consultant. I'd never heard the name before. I copied the permit number and took it to Naomi the next morning. She met me at a cafe near City Hall, a place with too many plants and not enough coffee. "That name show up anywhere?" I asked, sliding her the file. Naomi adjusted her glasses and read the permit. "Curtis Leland, wait. That's not a consultant. He used to work in zoning enforcement, retired 4 years ago. And now he's filing permits for fake buildings. He's not supposed to be. He lost his clearance after a conflict of interest complaint used insider access to push through permits for a private developer. Got caught approving variances without public hearings." I sat back. "So why is his name on an HOA permit?" Naomi didn't answer right away. She flipped to another page, then pulled out her phone and made a call. I couldn't hear the conversation, but her face tightened. When she hung up, she looked at me with a new edge in her voice. "That greenway, it's not a drainage easement anymore. It was rezoned last year quietly. On paper, it's now designated as low-density residential. Someone's prepping it for subdivision." I stared at her. "You're telling me Margerie's HOA bought up land, rezoned it without telling the community, then tried to fine people into submission so no one would object when they sold it off?" Naomi nodded. "That's exactly what I'm telling you." We both knew what that meant. When an HOA sells off common land, they're supposed to hold a vote. 2/3 majority, full transparency. But if you intimidate enough homeowners, serve them legal threats, and drain their time and money, no one shows up to vote. Then you push it through with a silent quorum and bury the paperwork. I called Officer Reyes on the way home. He didn't answer, but he texted back with a time to meet the next morning at the detective division downtown. When I walked in, Reyes was waiting with a woman in plain clothes. She introduced herself as Detective Laura Vasquez. Her handshake was firm but quick, already in work mode. "You've been busy," she said, flipping through the folder I handed her. "You realize this goes well beyond HOA harassment, right?" "I do now. We're looking at conspiracy to commit fraud, abuse of nonprofit status, and if that land was sold under false pretenses, possibly wire fraud." She nodded to Reyes. "We'll need to verify these permits, and we'll need the HOA's financial ledgers. Full ones, not the summaries they submit to the city." "I can get you those," I said. "Someone on the board sent me partials. They'll give you the rest." People are scared, but they're ready to talk. By the end of the week, Vasquez had enough to act. Search warrants were issued for the HOA's office, a converted sunroom in Margerie's house, and for the files at McBride and Bixby. The law firm folded like a cheap card table. Faced with subpoenas, Margerie's nephew turned over internal emails and billing statements. One of them, dated 6 months ago, was from Margerie herself. "Once the Greenway sale finalizes, we'll use the proceeds to reimburse legal fees retroactively." No need to involve the full board until we're past closing. Another email from Curtis Leland confirmed the buyer, a shell development company linked to a commercial real estate firm in Bend. Rays called me the night the warrants were served. We picked her up at her house. She tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding. Then she asked if she could make a call to the mayor. Let me guess he didn't pick up, I said. Nope. But the county prosecutor did. 3 weeks later, formal charges were filed against Margerie Walton: fraudulent misappropriation of community funds, conspiracy to defraud homeowners, unlawful trespass, and obstruction of municipal zoning procedures. Curtis Leland was charged as an accessory, and the firm's managing partner, her nephew, was indicted for participating in a fraudulent transfer scheme. The news spread fast. The city held a special town hall to explain the charges, and the place was packed. No one shouted. No one cried. They just listened. When it was over, Naomi stepped up to the microphone. There will be a full audit of all HOA-related transactions over the last 7 years. We're working with a third-party legal team to ensure every homeowner is reimbursed for any improper fine or legal fee. A temporary oversight board will be installed until new elections are held. There was no applause, just a wave of relief that passed through the room like a tide. The temporary board held their first meeting the following week. I didn't run for it. I didn't want to be in charge. I just wanted to live here without wondering if someone was measuring my mailbox with a ruler. Still, they asked me to speak. I stood up, cleared my throat, and looked around at the faces, some angry, some exhausted, all watching. I didn't plan to get involved. I just wanted to fix my fence without having a stranger drive a golf cart into my garage. Laughter rolled through the room, light but real. But what started as a boundary dispute turned into something uglier. Not just corruption, but a system designed to convince us we couldn't fight back. That we weren't allowed to question things. I paused. But we did, and we'll keep doing it. That night, I walked back home under a sky so clear you could see the stars between street lamps. The neighborhood felt different, not quieter but balanced, like a scale that finally tipped the right way. I passed the empty lot where the greenway used to be. Someone had hung a sign on the fence, "Community, not commodity." And beside it, in smaller letters, "Welcome back to Rose Hill."